Well, thank you everyone for coming. And I hope I can give you guys some really good tips on how to photograph your work, even just using your phone. That's kind of like the goal today. I do want to just make also, I want to say that we are also on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Indigenous peoples. And I also had 2 babies in this area. So, but I'm very happy to make Fredericton my home because I am from Ottawa, and actually my grandfather was born in St. John, so I'm really happy to come back to my roots. It probably fits more with my lifestyle than being the busy hubbub of Ontario. So going forward, I am going to start by giving a little PowerPoint presentation just to discuss how our technology works. Even if you're using a phone, just kind of like allows you to understand how your devices are thinking to take these images. Because I know point and shoots are just like a one shot, but there is some thinking involved, and we have to understand how these devices are thinking. And I will suggest in the future, if you are going to use your phone, to maybe get an app that allows you to control those things more. Like with my iPhone, I can't remember. With Android and iPhone, I think there are different compatibilities, but there's a lot of apps out there to allow you to really control these features that I'm going to be talking about, which will help you control the end result of your images. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so we will talk about it just basically. So there are 3 points to photography, key things you have to remember. Your camera, or the way an image is captured, is a trifecta. Everyone here I started on film in my 20s and I'm 40. So I think everyone, maybe when they had their point and shoots, you'd have to go buy a roll of film that had like different grades for light sensitivity. So there'd be like an ISO 100 or an ASA, it used to be called, ASA 100, which is you'd have to have a really sunny condition for that situation, going up to like ISO like 3000 something for really, really dark situations. In a digital camera, that would be our sensor, not our film. And it's called ISO. In a situation like this, I think I had my ISO at 500. But on a really sunny day, you're going to be looking at an ISO of 100. The other thing you have to consider is like your shutter speed. So like these are things that I can appreciate that a lot of people have like heard a lot of photographers say. So I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but shutter speed is controlling different scenarios for your shutter speed. So if you're shooting like a football scene, someone's throwing a football and you want to capture that ball in still motion, just like floating in the air without any lag or any distortion, you're going to want a really high shutter speed of about 1,000 per second. But when you're photographing your artwork, and if you're using a tripod, you would use a shutter speed of around like 80 or 60 because nothing is moving. You have full control. Your camera is staying still, so there won't be any blur. But if you wanted a blur of a football throwing, then you would do the opposite. You'd stick at 60, like a shutter speed of 60, because the ball is moving faster. It captures that movement. Or a car, like it captures that movement. So those are like the strategies behind, when a photographer is about to take their picture, those are the things they have to think about. Shutter speed also allows more light in depending on your setting, which is the big thing we're going to talk about today, which is light. The lower your shutter speed, like a whole second, would be a good scenario for like a dark night and you wanted a really good even exposure. So you'd set like a shutter speed at like 60 to allow the most amount of light in. And if you wanted a really dark, moody thing, you just throw your shutter speed up a little bit higher. The other part of the trifecta is the aperture. So your aperture is like the little pinhole that the light goes through your lens. So the aperture is, somewhere around here. Cameras don't really have an aperture, and I haven't found an app that allows you to control it. So that's not really something you would have to think about for this. But there's 2 components to the aperture, which we won't go into too much detail, but so your aperture can range from anywhere from like a 1.1 to like, or 1 to like, I think mine somewhere like a 24 If you're going to the 24 range, because it's really, really sunny, it's going to be very, very, very small, allowing a very little bit of light in. But if you're going to an aperture of 1.0, my aperture will be like this big, whereas if I wanted a really small aperture, it would be this big. So with a smaller aperture, the more light you're getting in. You're also creating that depth of field. The reason why most people want to go for a DSLR in the first place is ultimately for that depth. So when you see like a portrait, when you see just the person's eye in extreme focus, but everything else, like even like the eyebrow or the hair starts to get unfocused, it means that their aperture has been set at 1, which is letting the most amount of light in and allowing for that effect. But when you have your aperture set at something like a 24, where again, it would be like a pinhole. So it's not allowing a lot of light in, and you're allowing for a larger depth of field. So that photographers who shoot landscapes typically use a large aperture. And that's the scenario where you would have to start shooting at 1 second compared to like, a 60th of a second, or you could even go to 10 seconds. I think one exposure I had to like expose for 20 seconds in the pitch black of night and all that kind of stuff. So that's the trifecta of how your camera thinks, or how even your iPhone thinks. So now we're moving, or your phone. So we're going to move into just focusing on lighting now, because that is ultimately the most important part of taking images with your phone. Like, these cameras are great, but it really is just a tool, and ultimately it's about the knowledge, and it's about understanding lighting and understanding setup and being very, very, very patient. When you're going to set up to take your pictures of your work, it's not going to be 5-minute job. It's going to be maybe a half day, depending on how much setup you have to do beforehand. So this morning, this took me about an hour to set up. I'm not going to really focus on lighting, like this type of lighting. And the reason why I have to set this up is because this is really dark. It's a dark day. So I have to, so we're going to think about these lights as being our windows if you're going to be doing it inside. But outside, ultimately, what we want, what the best ultimate light is you're going to want to pick a day if you're going to be doing it outside, which I do suggest, because not everybody wants to invest in lighting. If you do want to invest in lighting, Costco, if you have a membership at Costco, I think they have a ring light being sold with a stand for $30 right now, if anybody was interested. But we're going to think about these as the sun or a window on a really, really bright day. And the best option though would be to take your photos outside, but on an overcast day. So not a bright sunny day, not a dismal day like today, but an overcast day. Because what that does, the clouds actually diffuse the light and make a really, really, really soft light. And that's probably your best tool. Like, every day is like, you might not be able to schedule it around that, because who has like that freedom to do so? But you will be looking for that type of lighting scenario if you're going to be doing it outside. So for now, we are actually going to be talking about how to set up your work for good photos, the cheap options you have available to you, and how to set that up, and the considerations you have to think about when you're going to engage in your photography. So because my computer is being silly today, I did take some photos of this setup. I'll move out of the way now. So I'm going to eventually share the images that I captured on this camera with you. So I will show you what I ended up capturing just briefly on my camera. So this is the image that I ended up getting with this scenario. And I wanted to point out to you, when you submit images, so you can see where that little thing is. If you submit an image like that, don't worry about it. It really is about cropping. And there are some things that I will be able to help you with, like Photoshop. Like, if you're trying to take that image and you can't, and you're getting the edges of your white background, don't worry about it. It's something that I can quickly do for you. I don't want to heavily rely on having to Photoshop everybody's image But if it's just something you can't get around, don't stress about it. It'll be fine. It's just like something that you have to consider in photography, that you will have to do some post-production, but I know that everybody doesn't have access to Photoshop and stuff. So it's something that I'm going to help you work with. And I can also help you in a scenario on a Zoom call if you're really struggling with setting stuff up. But we're going to talk about this setup today. So again, let's pretend that these are windows and not lights. Today, what I have, like this would be, I've set up this scenario for if you had a larger piece that was sitting on the floor that you needed to photograph. So this is a bed sheet, something that we all have in our house, usually a white bed sheet, or if you don't, just go to Valley Village. They're usually $4 for a white bed sheet, really cheap. That is special tape. I wouldn't suggest putting duct tape on your walls because it'll peel off, but like just painter's tape is also really good for this scenario. The only difficult part about setting this up is, as you can see, the sheet. I didn't have time this morning, but the sheet is really crinkly. So before you do a setup like this, you're going to have to iron your sheet out, because in Photoshop, if there's like a little crinkle, I'll easily be able to take that out. It's not an issue. If you had like this one crinkle you just couldn't get out, not a big deal. But the floor, like you see, there's so many crinkles there. So you're going to want to really iron that out. Make sure that it's nice and smooth. Any little creases will be fine. Again, I'll just like circle them, edit them out, and we'll be fine. But this is an amazing scenario to get an image like this. And so what we're looking for in these images is really even lighting, which you will get in a situation where there is overcast, and really even balance of, you know, lighting to, and this doesn't do this image justice at all. But you see how I've got like plenty of space on the sides. It is a little crooked, but that's also okay. Like you're trying to get an angle of the top of the table. I'm going to show you another kind of scenario. Here's one where I was able to actually be very careful in making sure that I got all my sides. There's not any, you can't see any corners. And so what you're looking for is you want your background to be white, but you don't want it to be blown out. So what I mean by blown out is like it's so white that you can't see any texture. This is the key element to taking photos in this scenario. I can always boost up the exposure, but if the white is so white that we've lost all dynamic information, I won't be able to get that back. So when you're taking your photos, just make sure you can kind of still see the texture of the white. You can still, you know, there's nothing really blown out. That's the key to taking these shots. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take a picture with my camera, and we will see how this looks. Just going to take a shot and we'll see how it goes. So this is what it looks like. So really, it really is about the lighting and not the equipment. And that's kind of what I'm really trying to express here. It's about the creativity, it's about the setup, it's about patience, it's about all those things. It's not about the equipment. It really is just about understanding how your camera works, understanding the lighting, understanding all these things. So Jillian suggested that she also wanted you guys to take images on backgrounds, but I'm also going to set up a scenario for you that if your work isn't this big, how can we do, you know, how would you do it cheaply, fast, and easy with the same kind of idea? So I ended up getting, so this is just white Bristol board from the dollar store. So it was like $1. It's, yeah, inexpensive, and it suits our needs. So I will also let you know in this scenario, you can see that there's no kind of line down there. It's a nice curved, let's see. So a nice curved situation. So we're not getting any lines. And it looks like just a simple, sleek background. In professional photography, the reason why I'm giving you the option, like the idea of a sheet, professional photographers in this situation, what we're using is paper. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but they're huge, huge rolls of sheets of paper, which don't have reflection, and you minimize all the creases. So that's the secret behind that. If anybody really wanted to know, how do they get those perfect white backgrounds and it's so sleek? That is ultimately the secret. But those sheets are like $200 to buy. They're huge, they're hard to store. So that's why this sheet is an excellent, excellent option. So just bear with me. I'm gonna set this up and then we will do a scenario of taking a picture of that little camera there. Okay, so give me 2 minutes. And I'll also explain to you what I'm doing as I'm setting up. While I'm setting this up, if you guys have questions, feel free to turn on your mics and ask me as well. This will take 2 minutes, but feel free to. Whose piece is like relatively as large as that table? Is that anybody? But okay, so ultimately, I'm just taking my sheet of paper and I'm gonna tape it to the wall.
Sarah, Renata does have a question. You remember that paper that we bought for the BTS shoot? The professional for what is that called?
I can't remember what its name is, but it's just like photographic paper, but I got it at Harvey's. So Harvey's typically has that paper in stock. Like I just walked in and walked out with it. So Harvey's is actually a really, really great resource we have in Fredericton for photographers and for printing their work. I find they're the better, like Costco is somewhat cheap, but Harvey's are great to work with that way. They do carry a lot of stuff like that. Okay.
So I guess whichever area you're from Newfoundland or Ontario, just try and find your best photographer shop in your city.
Yeah. But again, if you don't have $150 to $200 to spend on a roll of sheet of paper and the space to store it, a sheet is ultimately your best option. And if you are if you're like a painter or a textile artist, like we're not, like you are in luck, like you just have to find a white wall and just tack your, but it's just for people who have, objects, or this is your best scenario. But if you are photographing like a textile piece, something that's like flat, the same scenario applies. You're just hanging it on the wall, just making sure you have good lighting. Like in this scenario, this is why I love this space, because I have a nice window there. Sorry, I have a nice window. I'm pointing at my computer. A nice window there. I also have, sorry, this place is a mess. I also have another window here. And I use, sometimes if you're finding it too harsh, the light too harsh coming from your window, another tool, everyday use tool that you can use is just a sheer or another, like a bed sheet, just to put over the window to help the light diffuse. Because if you don't do that and it's a really, really sunny day, you'll end up getting really hard shadows on your work, like on the white background. So ultimately that's what we're trying to avoid, is really harsh shadows. We want it to be really, really, really balanced. So these are amazing tools to have in your toolkit, just to put over your window and help diffuse that light. So again, really simple, really easy. We'll pretend that light is my window today, and I will take a picture with my phone so we can see. Sometimes you will find that you will have to find a better spot for your work. Like in this scenario, I'm getting quite a lot of shadow. So this wouldn't be the best application for this. If I was just relying on my window, this would not be ideal. So you will have to maneuver your work to try to eliminate those shadows. Because can you see those shadows in this image right here? I'll take a picture for you on my phone just so we can compare.
Can I also just throw something in?
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been using paper for years, like the big, but I found it gets dirty really easy. I do ceramics.
Yeah.
And so you're going through it, and it's a real pain. But I'm now using a matte laminate, like a very thin laminate thing, and it's huge. Yeah. But I've had it for about 3 years, and it really doesn't scuff up, and I can get work up to 3 feet down to a little bit. Yeah. So that helps people, but it is a permanent structure. That's the only thing that's a pain.
The other, you just reminded me of another tip. If you wanted to invest in something, like you're right, like different materials really, really help. I do have for a background, I primarily use felt, or not felt. Sorry, this is fleece. So if you wanted to go and invest and go to like your local fabric store and buy white fleece, like a large white fleece, that actually will probably be better than a bed sheet because you can eliminate creases and stuff better. You won't have to iron it. And it's matte as well. But yeah, Darren's right, like paper is the best. But again, it's like, can get really expensive, and Darren said like you have to really have the space to accommodate it. So I'm going to take a picture of this, and then we will. Oh, I did already. So you can see, kind of, you can see better there, can't you? But yeah, all the shadows that are happening. So I'm going to move the lights, but when you're in this scenario, think about moving your work instead to eliminate those shadows. So I will move some lights, and we can see how that will drastically affect shadow in this scenario.
Are these the lights that you can get at Costco?
No, I bought these off the Kijiji. I found these for like, it was a 3-light kit for $150. But I think you can get them new for like $300, but it's still a big investment, right? Like, and the more advanced with the equipment you go, I think like one light is like $1,000. Like just the cost goes up. So we're really trying to make this cost effective so people don't have to invest in this equipment. But if you see yourself doing this, these are very good investments, and you can find them on Kijiji often. You can even use something like your table lamp, like having a table lamp off to the side. Like if you have a window that's coming in for that light and you have a table lamp, you can stick the table lamp on the other side to create that balance. And there will be things to consider like white balance, but I can handle that just as long as we're getting an even keel. So once all the images come in, I will balance everything out to try to make it uniform. But we are really trying to just get like a good baseline for everybody. So like my lamp that I have that's kind of shining on me is like a tungsten. So the white balance is like a little yellow, where this is like your window light will be a nice pure white. So those are the things that I can help you with in the post-production. But just use the tools that you have available to you in your home. So yeah, table lamps. What else? Like windows, table lamps are your biggest friend in this scenario. So
what type of lighting are those ones? Are those tungsten? The lights you're using right now?
Oh, these are, what are they? They're fluorescent, but they're photographer grade. So they're, the white balance is, what's neutral? 6,000 K. So when you're thinking about white balance, like 6,000 K, does everybody kind of grasp what I'm talking about here with white balance? In a way. Okay, so white balance is when we think about lights, like you can get, your household lights that are typically a nice warm hue of yellow, or you have like your evening light, as after golden hours happen, and when you take a picture, sometimes it looks a little blue, right? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about white balance. For an exhibition situation, we're going to try to get all the images at that neutral. So 6,000 K is neutral. And what that stands for is like the sun. When the sun's at its peak in the afternoon shining down, it's usually at a 6,000 K. But then, you know, the golden hour, like when the sun is setting, the white balance, or like the hue that the sun is giving off, is really, really, really warm. So those are the things we have to think about when we're taking our images. But again, don't stress about it, because if you end up submitting a file that has like a beautiful white light on one side and a little bit yellow on the other side, that's something that can be easily kind of tinkered with in post. So I don't want you guys stressing out too much about all that stuff, because it's, you know, another tool in your toolbox. But if you're just learning about all this stuff, you don't want to stress yourself too much. And I am very much willing to walk you through it as you're going through the steps. So we're going to move these lights again just to see the difference in shadow. So if I remove this light, can you see that there's quite a shadow on that side of the camera, which is good in some situations, but for our documenting, we're going to really want to eliminate those shadows as best we can. And then this on my computer screen would be a good scenario of the white blowout. So you see how like on the computer screen, all this is like just so white, it's like glowing. This is kind of the scenario. In real life, it doesn't look like that. But this is the scenario we want to avoid with our cameras. We want that white to be a nice, even white where we're seeing still the detail in the image. Are there any questions about like this scenario or this setup or this?
There seems to be a couple of questions popping up in the chat there. I'm not
sorry.
sure if you want to have a look at them.
Yeah. What's the name of this paper? I think we discussed that, the sheets. Bristol board, yeah. So what I have here is Bristol board. So yeah, the photographer paper is about $200. And Josie said, and I think I addressed that needs to be hung. You can just still hang it on a white wall. 3D objects that are hanging from the ceiling. Who was that? Was that you, Josie, that asked about the 3D objects hanging from the ceiling?
No, that was Renata.
Renata. Okay. So that's a tricky situation. How big is your object that you're hanging from the ceiling, Renata?
It's a full garment, so it has to be, is like almost like probably a person size, a little bit taller, and there is stuff hanging out on the ground as well, like on the floor. So yeah. I would say, I don't know, probably 2.5, 3 feet, the whole thing.
2.5 feet. Okay. Do you have any white walls in your house?
No, they are kind of they are light gray. Okay. That's why I was asking about the roll, the paper roll that hangs in maybe can hang from the ceiling, the roll as well, and then kind of like
yeah. So the roll, it literally is like you call it like a paper towel roll. You know, you're hanging it off of the rod. But yeah, if you're willing to invest in that, it would be a great thing to keep in your toolbox. If not, I would suggest just a sheet. Just put the sheet on the back wall and like tape it up, and just make sure it's real. If you don't want to invest that money, just make sure it's nice and ironed. And that would be my biggest suggestion for something hanging that size if you don't have a white wall in your house.
Yeah, the thing is, because it has to go, you have to give like an infinite depth for you, right? You have to have a kind of a depth, but the ceiling and the floor, they have to be one continuous thing, right? Because you don't want to see, because there is stuff hanging from the ceiling, there is also stuff on the floor. So like there's a suitcase on the floor and there is a dress on the ceiling.
Was it a part of your installation for Come From Away? Is it similar to that?
Yeah, that's the one. That's actually
okay. Yeah. So the sheet, unless you're going to invest in a big paper roll, your sheet is probably your best option. So again, the sheet was like, you really want to iron it And like the paper, you're going to want to have that really nice rounded edge instead, you know, like
Yeah.
same scenarios here, just really rounded. If you can't get all the white in frame, if you need to leave a lot of space around, that's fine.
Okay.
I can deal with that in post, even if it's ahead of the image, just as long as the work itself is all behind that white background. Then the rest is just post. So it's just as easy as just selecting that area and just telling Photoshop to fill it in with a white, essentially the white sheet.
Yes. I know that too. Yeah.
So yeah, just don't stress about that. Whatever resources you have, use them.
And stuff that has other lights like attached to a piece, for example, like if there's an installation, there is a light coming from the piece.
Okay.
Do you have any suggestions to kind of keep the color true to what it is?
Sometimes that's something that has to be manipulated in post, just because the nature of the camera. Like, I don't know how many times you hear photographers say, like, our eyes see so much, and cameras are so limited to all that depth and range, and photographers really rely on our post-production to balance those shadows and all that stuff out if it's a scenario where one light was a little bit too warm or a little bit too yellow. The only thing is, as you're shooting it, how much control do you have for that one light? Like, how much control do you have of that one light that you have to incorporate into
the light is a projection, so there is different lights. There is kind of a different now blues and greens, and the installation kind of changed the color as it goes. So yeah.
Okay, so how about, can we have a like separate conversation just so we can
for sure
the specifics of that shot? Same goes with everyone. If you have if you're really struggling and you want to just brainstorm some stuff, reach out. Zoom is probably best for me in the best case scenario, because there might be a lot of we can even do a Zoom meeting while you're trying to shoot, and we can kind of talk through the issues that you're having, because unless you do it every day, you kind of maybe are not thinking of how to work around that.
Thank you.
And Fatima just said we might be able to shoot your work. So I should mention that before I move. We will take a break, and then I'm going to touch upon backgrounds, because those are slightly different. They're similar, they're the same, but ultimately we'll talk about what is essential to getting that really good black background. So Sean said, when using the window as my light source, how do I avoid capturing my own shadow in the camera or the camera shadow? So it's a good question. So usually with the white background, you're going to want to have your light sources on the sides, not behind. That will eliminate shadows of your camera and of you. And that also is eliminating shadows of the object. So to have a window, again, the best case scenario for taking a picture on a white background when you don't have all the tools a photographer would have, is really just to go outside on an overcast day and take those shots. It really will give you that lighting, but if you don't have that option, you have to do it in your house. Again, a window on, so if this, this is that's our object. I keep on pointing to my screen, I'm so sorry. That's our object. You want a window on one side, and because you probably won't have a window on the other side, you'd want a lamp, or I think someone said you can go to Home Depot and buy a construction lamp, something you can clip onto something. Usually if you're gonna get, we discussed white balance, if you're gonna want to get a bulb for that, try to find a bulb that's right near that neutral. So when we all go shopping for bulbs for home, we do look, is it cold or is it warm? You're gonna wanna look for a light bulb that's right around that. It's gonna say 6,000 K. A little bit off is not gonna in post, it's not going to make too much of a difference, but that's ultimately what you're looking for, is like a 6,000K light bulb. And that's going to be your reference. So that's how you eliminate those shadows. Because if you did have a light behind you, you would ultimately be getting that shadow from behind. So that's why the light, you want it to be coming in from the side and not from behind. So that's how you're eliminating those shadows. Sorry, I wasn't clear about that more. And from Trish, dolly head or hold it. That about Trish, about your hat, that would probably be more of a question for Jillian. I think it's a great, because in some situations, some people are maybe going to want to use plinths. So you're going to want to ask Jillian about that. I think it's great because it's like the symbolism of what a hat is, but just ask Jillian about that, I guess. And what iPhone would you recommend? I can get back to you, Shauna, on regarding the apps. They change all the time. Probably the app that I used to use all the time is probably not available anymore. I will go, let me write a note for myself. I will, for everyone, try to find some apps for Android and iPhone that are highly rated. So share some, I have like a really nice PDF of examples of like what an ISO does, what ISO really does. It's very visual, so it really, really helps you. So when you do download that app, it'll be a good tool to have in your back pocket. So you have something to reference, right? What does this mean? Like if I change this setting, how will it affect it? It's a really, really, really good tool. Wondering why are you using a white? So he asked, why are you using white as a background? We're using white as a background because that's what Jillian has requested. So she's asking for a white background and a black background. She wants to prioritize the white background, and then a black background would be, a secondary and really nice to have. So that, hence the reason why we're discussing. And we just want everyone to kind of follow that same streamline so everything looks similar when we're presenting our work, when you guys are presenting your work digitally. So it's a nice streamlined situation. So now we're going to talk about black backgrounds. Black backgrounds are actually, your house is the perfect place to take a photo of a black background because you actually want to have a dark environment and you only want one light. That's kind of it, your table lamp, anything. It's a real easy setup and lighting scenario to do because you actually really are trying to harness a shadow. And ultimately the shadow you're trying to harness is the black. So you want that black to be as much in shadow as possible. And that's what creates that black that you see in that really nice one light photography. So I'm going to turn off all my lights and keep this light on. So this would be your window and you want everything else turned off. So it doesn't look so dramatic right now, but you kind of got the idea. Like we've pretty much eliminated all other light in the room. I've even blacked out my window. Today is not like a day that's like really required, but on a really, really sunny day, like that is just Bristol board again, just taped up. It's blocking the light source so we can really harness one light. Again, if it's just a window, it's fine. If it's your table lamp, it's fine. So I'm going to take a shot with my camera phone so we can get an idea of essentially what this lighting setup does. And this black that I have here, this is actually the the fleece that I was talking about. It's a really, really nice matte substance. Again, I got this at Valley Village. Sorry, it was in my woodshed throughout all that production that I was doing. So there's a bit of sawdust on it, but great tool. I think I got it for $3 at Valley Village. It's perfect. No shine off of it, really matte. You really, with this type of fabric, you don't get that bunching and shadowy look that you would get with like a sheet where you have to like iron it out and make sure all that stuff is ironed out, because ultimately what we want to capture is a big shadow. So all that stuff will ultimately also be hidden. So And then in this scenario, like if you're using a window, you want to adjust your item that you're trying to photograph. You can just move it around, see where the shadow and the light are hitting. It's really just like a trial and error thing. You're really wanting to highlight, you're using your light to highlight a feature part of what you're trying to really capture. So I'm really just trying to capture the end of the lens and like some writing on the camera. And that's all I really want in focus and lit. The rest of it, I really just want in shadow as best as possible. So this is a great example of an image that didn't really work out. So there's a lot of adjustment involved. Again, there's sawdust and stuff, but you can see there's like a ton of dirt, a ton of like the black isn't black. So when you're photographing your work, if you're just using window, you'll be maneuvering your work instead of the light. But because I have like a light, I'm going to maneuver the light a bit. So I actually might move my light like this. So it's creating more of a shadow behind the actual piece, which is going to allow it to be really, really black. And you're also there's a little bit of shadow underneath. And just like a little bit of reflection is going to be coming off of the highlight area of the camera. And then it'll give it that look that we're really looking for, help create that look that we're looking for. So in this image, it's a little crooked, but here you can see like all back here is all black. Sorry. So this is like pure black up here. We're not getting as much dirt around here. So if this area, if you're using a back background and like the front of the image is a little bit lighter, again, don't stress. That's something that can be adjusted in Photoshop. What we're trying to do is we're trying to do our best to get the results we want with our camera, not really thinking about post-production. But again, there's just going to be some things that we're not professional photographers. You might have like an hour because your kids are coming home from school. So if you can't get it perfect, it's okay. That could be something I can do in post. I'm going to take another picture of this with this camera. There will be a little bit of a quality difference, but we'll just have a look at what the shadows look like here. Again, if you're going to be like relying on your camera to be like controlling the ISO and controlling the shutter speed and stuff, you're going to want to be patient with yourself and really just tinker, because every little adjustment makes a big difference. So what I had to do right now is my ISO was like at 200, which is a great ISO level for really bright situations, but because we're in a really dark situation, I had to throw my ISO down to 800 in order to capture the highlights and adjust to the dark lighting situation. So if you're gonna try to control it like that, those are the things, you take a picture and your camera settings are set for, we'll say, the white background. And then you come and you're like, oh, you're stressed because, I'm not getting that shot. So just take a breath, think about the adjustments that have to be made with all the information that I'm going to be sending to you in a minute. So I adjusted my ISO from like 200 to 800. At 200, it was totally black. I couldn't see what was going on, but now I'm going to take a picture at 800. And it's still too dark, so I'm going to adjust my ISO to like 1,000. Okay, so this is a great example. So my ISO was set at ISO like 1,000, which means it was making it sensitive to how dark it is. But if you can see, it's totally black. It's totally black, and the only thing really standing out is the actual product or the feature, your artwork, or this lovely camera that I have. So any questions about the black background setup? Because I find it's a much easier setup than white, because again, you are really having to to fill the space with all that light to create a balanced image, but with a black background, you're really just wanting shadow. And to create those shadows, harness the shadow to get that real black and just focus on illuminating and lighting up your product. Yeah. So any questions on background? Okay, any questions in general? And just for all those like little adjustments that I mentioned, like little, you know, if you use a background and just like one corner is just like a little bit too light, I'll darken that up. Again, with the white background, if you're finding, if you used a sheet, if there's like a crinkle or you couldn't get all white in the frame. Again, like if you're gonna photograph in a natural environment, the lighting scenarios still apply. An overcast day is great. Actually, even a day like today is great. Rainy days are fantastic for taking work. Like the environment is shimmery, it looks beautiful. You just don't want to get drenched. But, you know, again, those overcast days are perfect. And if you wanted to go outside and take a photograph, but it was a super sunny day and you're having trouble managing your shadows, that is when like a white bed sheet comes in handy to diffuse the light, where you just like, you know, if you're photographing by your laundry line, you wanted to get it in like a really nice scenario, the sun is just too dramatic, just like hang up a nice white sheet in between the light and the product, and it will diffuse the light really beautifully, and you won't have to, you know, it'll diminish your stress that way. And that's how to really harness those situations.
File sizes are a question that's coming up too, Sarah. Like, what do you want for file sizes? And there's also a question about, oh no, maybe I missed that one. Maybe you already did that. The image files between an iPhone camera and uploading to Mac, and how to keep the sizes, basic editing, that kind of stuff. But more, I think the file size thing and what we're actually giving you is probably, you need that stuff.
Yeah, so when it comes to iPhones and phones, you don't have much, you can't, you know, the file size you're going to get with your phone is the file size you're going to get. The reason why photographers love big file sizes is because we're usually shooting raw, and so we can manipulate stuff quite well. But just any JPEG format is fine. The only problem you'll have is if you're dealing with large file sizes that a photographer has shared with you, transferring those files through Dropbox is probably your best option. But again, file size for me isn't really an issue. Again, because with your phone, your image is going to be compressed already, right? So that's why photographers go for the option of the DSLR, is because but from your perspective, I don't worry about it. It's not really an issue, because yeah, your camera, if you're taking pictures with a point and shoot, it's just going to compress the file, and that's just not in your control on your end. And it's just something, you know, that we're going to work with. Yeah, so that's why it's really important, because the file sizes aren't large, that we really have to focus on capturing the images as best we can with our lighting, because I'm not going to really be able to manipulate that much with a very, very compressed file. And if you're having your images professionally photographed, I won't be touching them either. I just want to be able to reach out to the photographer to let them know, you know, so and also from an artist's perspective, to notify the photographer that the photos are going to be used for that situation as well. It's just really respectful to let them know that it will be used that way. Yeah. Any other questions? So can you talk about how to handle a textile wall hanging in an outdoor scene? I can, but you'd have to be willing to put some nails in somewhere to hang, or like, even we could talk about like creative ways to do it. If you have a clothesline that's very, very sturdy, you could, if the artwork isn't too heavy, you could use that. Or if you're willing to use a wall, like a shed wall, and using some strong tape, applying your sheet potentially to the side of the wall, and then you would have to nail in your piece into that wall. So an outdoor scenario like that would be very tricky, just because you would have to come up. I don't know the specifics to the environment that the person who, Francis, yeah. So I don't know your situation, Francis, what options you have in your backyard, but you could also put up a bunch of 2x4s. There's so many creative ways to do it. It's just, when you think about photography, you have to think you're actually really committing to your time to really set these things up for success, and allowing yourself for time and patience and being creative. So Francis, do you what is your scenario like outside? Like, do you have a surface you can hammer into, or is that not an option for you? Like, my house is cinder block, so it wouldn't be an option for me. I definitely wouldn't be able to pull that one off. How many shots are you looking for? So regarding the multiple angles, I think Jillian is looking for as many shots as possible, but you don't have to submit 20. Just 1 or 2 of your best images of each background would be fine. And not too many angles. Whatever angle highlights your work the best is my only suggestion. So, if a side angle, if a feature of your work, if there's a beautiful feature featuring that part of your image, is fine with me. Just, you're the artist, your art, you know how to, what should be featured the most. So that really would be a call that you would make.
The outside photo is around the scene. It's not necessarily that you want one kind of showing the scene of outside. It's you want the kind of lighting of outside. Is that it? Yeah. So if I put one on, if I put it on the side of the house, I would have to put a white sheet behind it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you wanted to take it in an, I don't know what your piece looks like, but if you wanted to take it in a natural environment that the work responds to, if wherever that is for you.
I could put it on a nice big rock.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
I never thought of it. Another option for outside, if you don't have anywhere to hang, it does make it tricky because you can't really pull your fabric, but you can put it right on the ground, or a board piece of paper just right on the ground, and the image right. If it's small enough, you don't have a space to hang it up, just put it right on the ground and then photograph it from right on top. You will have to manage and figure out where you're going to stand to eliminate those shadows, but typically on an overcast day, it's a benefit.
Okay, thank you.
So someone asked, do you have preferences for size, for image dimensions? I think I've kind of talked about that when it came to file sizes. I don't know the format that the web developer is going to require, but ultimately I'm going to try to provide them with images with a lot of space around the featured work. So if they need to crop, if there's a specific dimension that they do need, I'll make sure that that is formatted for them, because that will ultimately be dependent on the template that they're using digitally. But yeah.
I know that there are a few artists who have submitted photographs, because some of them have gone through me, and they have submitted photographs in natural environments, especially because it speaks so strongly about the environment they are in, or the land that they are from, or it relates to the project. So Francis, I know that your rugs are really huge, and I can understand why you would want to put it on a sheet on your wall and you would want to submit that photograph. But please feel open to submitting a photograph in the natural environment outside if your work really speaks to it. And we are open to that. Like a black background and white background, it's not only about the lighting outside. Of course, that's going to help, but it's also about getting the landscape of the piece. And if your piece really speaks to the natural environment outside, then please go ahead and submit that photograph, because we've already had a few artists do that. Does that clarify your question, Francis?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.